good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody enjoyed their lunch. A couple announcements before we get going. Registration is open for the annual convention, so you can do that on the SAIA website now. And tomorrow, we are going to have a President's Virtual Happy Hour from 5 to 6, where you can all stay online and we can chat a little bit and just talk like we're not talking enough already. But if you'd like to do that, that'll be fun. This afternoon, we're going to be doing the Industrial Scaffold Council meeting. The Industrial Scaffold Council, their mission is to be a resource and advocate for positive and safe change in the growing industrial market as it relates to the unique needs for temporary work platforms of all types. And with that, it is chaired by Bob Gibson of Sunbelt Rentals, and the co-chair is Chris Moody of Direct Scaffold Supply. And I will now turn it over to Bob. Thanks, Bob.
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon, and I think maybe good morning to some folks. So we get the screen share going here. All right, so everyone can see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, so getting started, talk a little bit about our agenda from the kind of continuation from our last meeting. We're going to go over the revision for the guidelines for the use of self-retracting lifelines or use with scaffold ladders. That's kind of a mouthful. And then we want to discuss a few future items. So with that, this is the guidelines broke into 3 pages. So I kind of put this on the screen so everyone could kind of see what it would look like as an overall document. But as I go through the PowerPoint, we're going to break down into some smaller segments so you can actually see the writing versus the way it is right now. So with this, kind of walking through this, we went through this in the last meeting, and there were a lot of comments and suggestions. We went back and kind of went through those things and made those adjustments. So I kind of want to walk back through this one more time and just kind of make sure we've got those items addressed. And once we've kind of completed this, then we can move forward with sending it for some oversight, and hopefully we'll get this prepared to get out for some folks in the field to use. So with that, I'll kind of go over, one was we changed the title of the document. Now it states guidelines for the use of self-retracting lifelines for use with scaffold ladders. It shall be the responsibility of all users to read and comply with the following common sense guidelines, which are designed to promote safety and the use of self-retracting lifelines for scaffold ladders. These guidelines do not purport to be all-inclusive, nor to supplant or replace other additional safety and precautionary measures. If these guidelines in any way conflict with state, local, provincial, federal, or government statute or regulation, said statute or regulation shall supersede these guidelines, and it shall be the responsibility of each user to comply therewith. Types of scaffold davit arms: only connect self-retracting lifelines, SRLs, to approved anchorage devices such as davit arms. Always consult your scaffold manufacturer and supplier with the proper types of davit arms and self-retractable lifelines, SRLs, suitable for scaffold ladders, and there shows some examples. So Chris is going to kind of capture some notes or anything there. If someone has a comment, we can do through the chat. You can send those, or you can actually email those to us.
Hey Bob, hit F5 on your computer and you can make that screen a little bigger. Well,
Does that work?
no.
I think the problem I've got is a multiple monitor, so it changed on the other monitor.
Oh. All right. Well, then we'll just go with it. Never mind. I was just trying to make it a little bigger for everybody to see.
If it changed on the other monitor, then that should be the monitor you share, and then you'd get it full screen.
Let me see if I can stop the share and change it. 1 second. Did that
There we
change?
go. Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So next page, installation of davit arms and SRLs. Scaffold davit arms should be connected only to vertical posts of scaffolds. Davits shall be installed above the ladders, and all vertical posts must be properly braced with horizontal and/or diagonal connections. Next, do not install any components in ways that will interfere with ladder rungs and personnel climbing ladders. Do not install SRLs to scaffold components that are not designed for attachment of SRLs to scaffolding, such as side brackets. And the two pictures on the right, I'm actually looking to either change those to something a little bit better. And if anyone has any pictures, we would welcome those. So if you'd be glad to send those, if you have any additional pictures we could use. But I do want to change those two pictures to something that shows a little bit clearer and maybe clean that background out.
Bob, Tom Brewer here. Can you go back to one slide, to slide 5?
This one?
Yeah. So your diagram on the left looks like it's showing your davit or your retractable way up above the framework of the scaffold, but the picture on the right is showing what you said, that everything had to have the horizontals and diagonals in at the point of attachment. I just wondered if that picture is in conflict with the diagram.
It's actually showing two different methods. So this one, I guess the picture may be showing a picture that shows where it has the horizontals that's going all the way around. And then the one on the left is showing a horizontal, and then it has two diagonal braces back down. So it's actually two different things.
I got you. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, next, connecting the SRL to the davit should only be done with proper hardware such as shackles. I do know that there was a comment about adding the term or adding thing about carabiners. I did not do that. Do we think that should be part of it? I know a lot of the fall protection manufacturers do supply carabiners for that. So if anyone has any objections, or I think we should add carabiners in there. If anyone has any objections, send a note or speak up.
I think you'd have to add in there that it has to be a properly rated carabiner. Because if you just use the blanket term carabiner, I mean, I've got carabiners that won't hold my tools, much less a SRL.
Okay. Properly rated carabiner. Okay, next, self-retracting lifelines should have a tagline installed so the user can pull the hook down to connect it to their D-ring on the front or back of their harness. Use of the SRL is limited to only one person at a time. SRL should be attached above the ladder as to allow the person to reach the top of the ladder and then exit the scaffold onto the scaffold platform. Exit the ladder onto the scaffold platform. It is recommended that the SRL be attached outward away from the ladder to reduce the potential of the lifeline interfering with the person's ability to climb the ladder. Do not install the SRL in such a manner that will require the lifeline to pass under the person's arms or between their feet. Always install the SRL directly over the ladder as to minimize the potential for swing falls. Freestanding scaffolds shall be designed by a qualified person to prevent tipping when the SRL is attached outside the footprint of the scaffold. Scaffolds can be restrained from tipping by guying, tying, bracing, or other equivalent means. All right, next. Inspections. Inspections must be completed under the supervision of a competent person. Always follow the manufacturer's guidelines for the inspection of SRLs and the inspection of the scaffold components. Inspections may be completed in the same intervals of scaffold inspection. When inspecting the SRL, check for loose screws and bent or damaged parts. Check the housing for distortion, cracks, or other damage. Ensure the anchorage point is not damaged or distorted. The lifeline must fully extend and retract smoothly with no hesitation or slack line condition. Ensure the device locks when the lifeline is pulled sharply. Lockup should be positive with no slipping. All labels must be present and fully legible. Check for corrosion on the entire unit. Check the lifeline for cuts, burns, chemical damage, or abraded areas. The lifeline must not be damaged. Check the connecting hooks or carabiners for damage, distortion, or corrosion and working condition. If the inspection reveals an unsafe or defective condition, remove the SRL from service and contact an authorized service center or person for repair. Never attempt to repair or service it yourself. Check the SRL for manufacturer's recertification dates. Follow the manufacturer's guidelines for recertification intervals. All right, this was the last slide on this. When inspecting the davit arm, check to ensure it's properly connected to the scaffold. Ensure the vertical posts of the scaffold are properly braced. Check to ensure the freestanding scaffold towers are restrained from tipping. Check the davit for distortion, cracks, or other damage. Ensure the anchorage of the davit is not damaged or distorted. Ensure the shackles or other connecting devices such as carabiners are proper for the device and they are not distorted or damaged. Shackles must be properly seated. So that's all of that. So if there was any comments, just Chris, is there anything coming through on the comments or?
No, sir.
Okay. So I think everyone's speaking up. So I think we've about covered that. There will be a minor change at the beginning with the what we stated about the carabiners, change those pictures, and then we should be able to take this to the next steps would be the oversight, and once we've completed those, we would be ready to put this out for everyone. Any other questions or comments around that before we move forward? All right. So the next item, so in the last committee, council meetings we had, we talked about a couple of other future topics or some things that we were looking to work on some more. And one of those was other forms of scaffold access in industrial environments. So Chris and I talked about this a little bit more. You know, I put a couple of things on there. It's attachable ladders, stairways, hatch decks. You know, there may be some other things out there. And Chris and I kind of talked about, I guess, looking for some guidance. Is there something specific to work on with this, or is there something to pursue here? We're kind of at a bit of a loss to say, hey, okay, you know, do we just put something out there that shows, you know, other types of access, or what could we gain from putting something together here, or do we just kind of scratch this? So if anyone has some suggestions as to more depth of what we would like to see here, we could kind of pursue that. If not, we'll maybe move on to something else.
What about ladder cages?
Okay.
Because they're pretty common in the refinery world anyway.
So that would kind of be included in there. Do we need, I guess, do we want to make something that's a guideline? Do we need a guideline specific to ladder cages, or is it something that's scaffold access for industrial environments?
Alan Klein, I have a comment about cages.
Okay.
OSHA's phasing them out over the next 20 years. All new industrial ladders that are made, fixed access ladders that are made with cages, have to have a safety device within the cage itself. The cage is no longer considered a single safety device. Now, anything that's already built out there can still have a cage. I've never seen a cage on an attachable ladder on any kind of scaffolding, ever.
We do them all the time.
Well, that'll be interesting to see how it overlaps with OSHA, because OSHA's definitely come out with this 20-year ruling to phase them out of the ladder industry anyways.
So most of what I've been seeing over the past several years is more moving to the use of self-retracting lifelines, which would, actually be more protection. It would arrest the fall versus the cage. So I think we're probably industry-wise, we may be seeing ladder cages kind of somewhat going away. You may still see it some places.
Well, I don't see any retractable lifelines, Bob. What the ladder industry sees is fixed cable devices and fixed tracks that are actually attached to the center of the ladder, and that's the trend that OSHA wants us to go to. They have not talked about retractable lifelines at all. You could use them, I'm sure.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot in the industrial environment. So everything that, and I see probably more so scaffolds that are, and they set that at certain heights. Maybe some places it could be anything over 10 feet. Some may be 15, some are 20, and they say every scaffold that's above that height would have to have a self-retracting lifeline for the user. So that's kind of what we're seeing. Part of why we did the guidelines for that earlier because I have found situations where guys would think, hey, we'll just hang this from a side bracket or whatever, just, kind of giving some better guidance around that from an industry perspective. So.
What you brought up is a good point. That might be somewhere down the line to get an OSHA interpretation as to how the new cage law or the cage rules are going to be, how they would affect an industrial scaffolding application. I wouldn't worry about it now, but somewhere down the line we might have to.
Okay.
Hey, Bob, we have a comment on the chat just saying, how about producing a general practice tip sheet on cages, stairway access, and hatch decks, taking manufacturer specifications, and just kind of producing a generic form for the members. Just a little simple how-to tip sheet.
Okay. All right. That would be a good idea.
I think if you're going to do one on stairs, though, you need to include that most scaffold stairways are not IBC compliant.
Okay.
And the regulations that Alan was talking about is 1910.27. That's fixed ladders. So we're not talking about scaffold ladders yet. That may change, but as it is now, this is ladders that are attached to buildings and smokestacks and things like that.
Yeah. And keep in mind too, we're balancing between the industrial environments we work in and what the supported council may do with all supported scaffolds. So we're trying to focus in on the industrial environment and not necessarily crossing into commercial applications quite as much. So. Okay, anything else on the ladder side before we move on? Okay, very good. Okay, so the other suggestion that came up during the last council meeting was other forms of scaffold planks in industrial environments. So kind of very similar to what we were talking about with the ladders, and kind of where do we want to go with this? What would we like to do or see around that? And so just kind of throwing out some. They're wood plank, steel plank, aluminum plank. And I know from our work perspective, we were using a lot of wood plank. We're trying to incorporate more metal plank into these environments, just around, you know, some of the heat and stuff that the wood and stuff may be subjected to, potential fire hazards, stuff like that. So was there anything more specific around something there in wood or scaffold planks? I'm sorry, not just wood, scaffold planks in industrial environments.
And just keep in mind, we're trying to tailor this straight to industrial environments because we do not want to infringe on the Plank and Platform Committee or Council. We're trying to, if there's any specification or specifics that pertain to industrial environments.
Sunbelt has used fiberglass plank too, Bob.
Yeah. And there may not be anything here. It was kind of, well, Chris and I talked about this more, you know, prior to this council meeting, to say, you know, there may not be anything we really want to do around this. That's okay as well. We can, you know, put our efforts into something else. So if anyone has something there, suggestion or any of that, you know, we can forward on. If not, I'm going to kind of say, hey, I don't know there's anything specific we want to do here at this time, and we can always revisit it later if something comes up. So.
Hey, Bob, this is Wendy with the supported council. So back one slide, you said you didn't want to step on our toes, but if you did all the work and we took all the credit, we wouldn't mind that.
Sure. Well, the next slide is kind of, I was on yours yesterday and I was looking, I was like, darn, Wendy's kind of, you know, stealing my thunder here a little bit, you know. So I think it may be something we can collaborate on. So.
Yeah, Bob, this is Dave with the Supported Council. I fully endorse Wendy's statement.
Sure. Okay.
As this is a virtual meeting, we can virtually do anything we want.
Yeah.
Steal, beg, borrow, go for it.
Okay, so the next item, Chris and I had talked about this in a little more detail, and this it kind of goes a little bit with what Wendy was talking about yesterday, but I'm speaking on this one a little bit more on industrial environments. So we do the daily or work shift inspections on scaffolds in the industrial environment. So some areas or some concerns, I listed some things. We're talking about work sites that have large quantities of scaffolds. So you could have anywhere from 500 to 800 or so scaffolds on this location, this particular job site. A lot of them may be relatively small. Typically what we see is the foreman or crew foremans are doing these shift inspections. They typically ask that these guys come in an hour before the normal work shift to do those. And some of the concerns I've had over some of the time is, you know, is do we give them enough time to do these inspections, you know, in that hour? One thing we've actually started looking at is in cases where these guys may be out there kind of by themselves. So, you know, scaffolds to do these inspections, they need to climb up the ladder so that they can look at it. And, you know, do we have someone working alone? Something could happen. You know, this is prior to the shift of other people working out there. And then the other thing we've run across is just the fact that foremen, we now are occupied doing this, taking away from the pre-job planning and the time maybe they're wanting to line up the crews prior to that shift getting started. So with that, I kind of setting the stage for what I was thinking, and we've done this in a couple of industrial locations, hand in hand with our client. But I was thinking, do we do as an industry, can we develop a guideline and or training to allow the user to become competent to perform daily work shift inspection updates? And I kind of want to emphasize the updates, because what we've kind of done in that guidance we've done through Sunbelt was we're going to build the scaffold, we're going to do that inspection, and the person doing that daily update after that is only updating to help maintain, it maintains the current condition, and they're not really looking in the overall design. They're looking at, hey, has that scaffold been damaged in some way? Has there been a modification to that scaffold, or things around that? And so that would be maybe a little bit more simpler training for the individual, and that we could kind of give some guidance on there. So kind of throw that one out there a little bit. And I think that kind of goes a little bit with what Wendy and them maybe were looking at from the supported council. So is there maybe something we can collaborate together on, or is this something that may be useful? So.
Actually, I think Sean should chime in here because the OTC has been working on some stuff.
Yeah, Bob, we're right in the middle of the foundation of an inspector program. The problem is that it's all governed by the simple phrase that OSHA requires it to be inspected by a competent person. And so what we have to do is develop what a competent inspector is, which may end up being more than just what your average competent scaffold builder is. So once, you know, it's all, like I said, it's already being worked on. So that program should be out, or at least a regulation and a review within a few months anyway.
So would that be something kind of different? I guess one of the things we were kind of looking at, or my thought on this was, again, some of the updates, determining different levels of competency, that this person is competent to perform scaffold updates to scaffold tags or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, if you can look at it two different ways. You can look at it like an inspector would need to know at least what a builder would know, and then possibly some more. Or you can look at it like I can train a person to be a competent person on that Baker scaffold they're using in 25 minutes. And because they're only dealing with with a decorator scaffold, they're fine as far as the way OSHA looks at it. They were trained to be competent in that. So if we take that fixed supported scaffold on an industrial site, that the person who's inspecting it knows that it cannot be altered in any way, and they've been shown what it's supposed to look like, could they inspect it from a photo book or something like that? So it all depends on what the lawyers say at the end of this exercise as to whether or not we can lessen what, I don't want to say lessen, that's a bad idea. If we can shave down the amount of knowledge you need to be an inspector.
I'm going to weigh in with Bob on this. From the industrial side, I mean, you're right. An industrial facility could have 100 to 500 scaffolds up at any one point in time. I mean, I personally have been recently involved in a project of capturing some data on freestanding scaffolds at one of our facilities, and it's an all-day job. the inspector could actually just begin inspecting in the morning and never stop and never get to all of them on site and start back over again the next day. And 90% of the towers are probably less than 10 foot tall, freestanding, to give access to one particular thing. And I feel the pain, Bob, as far as trying to find a way where we could take, the user and give him some degree of ability to say, this freestanding tower has everything it needs on it up to a certain point. But it's a tough thing to beat the OSHA requirement that it be done by a competent person.
Is there something where we can have an inspection course, but the employer still deems them competent? So if we have an inspection course that teaches and trains how to inspect scaffolds, but the employer still has to deem them competent, would that be a little more along that lines?
Yeah, I can weigh in here just a little bit. We've actually had this situation happen out here where we've had multiple like stair towers on a specific project, and the GC come to us. It's like, look, I need my people to do these stair tower inspections. And when something like that comes up, it's basically more of a one-on-one. So I'm a little bit concerned with developing a guideline or something like that for these people to use, because I think it's got to be site specific for what you're looking at. And, and in this case, that's exactly what we did. We trained them through action, but we did them on a site specific, detailed to that particular stair tower. It didn't apply to any other type scaffolds out there. So I think for the SAIA to come out and try to develop a guideline or whatever, I agree with Wendy. OSHA is going to put it back on the onus on that employer to designate that competent person, but I don't think we want to mislead anybody without having our inspector course. I would like to see where our inspector course goes first before we start putting a document like that out.
Well, and I also believe on industrial sites, it's going to come down to your contract. Your contract is going to require you to inspect the scaffolds pre-ship. I know ours do. And what we've had to do is we have to divvy it up by areas, because you're right, you can have multiple scaffolds, and if one person did do it, it's more than a full-time job. But we break it off into areas like this. One foreman inspects the scrubbers, one inspects the boiler, one inspects the turbine. We have to break it up because they're literally, if you went on an inspection tour of 400 standing scaffolds by yourself, you're literally going to be there for at least 3 days. If you're doing it right, not pencil whipping it. That's the other factor in this, is most of your actual inspections, are they really even happening?
Yeah, and that's been a little my concern, I guess, and kind of even within our organization, is our clients may be putting some unrealistic expectations to say, hey, we're going to let you bring in, 2 guys an hour before the shift to inspect these 500 scaffolds, and we're going to say, no, that's not going to work. And just kind of looking, hey, from an industry perspective, kind of giving some expectation or some guidance. That was my thought around this subject.
I think from an industry perspective, there are way too many variables in it to issue a guideline for it.
Okay.
And on the industrial side, if the customer is ultimately going to make that kind of requirement, we're hopefully going to be able to say, well, fine, then I need to add 2 full-time people to our project that don't do anything but inspect scaffolds for us. And here's their bill rate. And they can then go through the SAI's competent person training program and or inspector's class, and then we got it covered.
So it's like a win-win.
What we did. We have a limit on how many scaffolds one person can inspect during an outage.
And what do you feel like? What's that appropriate limit?
It depends on what area of the plant they're in, because some of them are more spread out and sparse. Like the turbine, you're on 2 floors, but if you're out in the scrubber, you could be on 8 floors. And it just depends. And it's always before each outage we negotiate how many people we're going to need to do a pre-shift inspection. Okay. And not everybody buys off on that. We've had some resistance with that, and it's gotten to what I would call "quote unquote" aggressive negotiations about that.
The plants don't want to pay for it.
Never. They assume it happens by miracle.
So maybe it seems like the consensus is that we don't necessarily go this route right now. And I think maybe what Sean said earlier too is let's kind of wait for the inspector program. We can kind of look at that, and then maybe we can have discussions around this at a future date once we've got that inspector program and see where that kind of goes. So I guess, you know, maybe that's the direction we can go with this particular topic.
Or we could just take Wendy's plan of action and let the OTC do all the work and we take the credit for it.
That's a good idea as well.
I think that's the same thing.
Unfortunately, it's all the same people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So Chris, if you want to join us, come on over.
All right, well, that's the last slide I had there. Any other suggestions or things anyone can see the industrial council work on? Some problems that you may run across, or you know, again, open for some ideas or suggestions. Okay, well, I appreciate everyone's time. We finished a little early, kind of expected maybe that a little bit, but I do appreciate everybody's time, and I guess we'll turn it back over.
Okay, thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
All right, our next meeting is the International Council. It'll start in about 25 minutes. So you're free to get up, move around, or stay and chat, whatever you'd like to do.